Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today is really laser focused. We're not reading a textbook. We are building your final formula sheet. Think of this as your last minute, high impact revision session for Python lists and, well, the core programming patterns that are built on them.
Exactly. This is for you if you're an experienced learner and you just need to synthesize all this complex stuff fast. We're going to move past the basic definitions and really just distill everything down into 5 core repeatable logic patterns. Things like iteration, conversion, tracking, searching, and sorting. You have to master these to move forward in, well, any coding context, really.
Okay, let's unpack this. We'll jump straight into the structure of a Python list, but we're going to move pretty quickly. We're only focusing on the concepts that tend to generate problems later on.
Right. So at a high level, the Python list is known for its incredible flexibility. It's amazing. Unlike in a lot of other languages, these lists can hold multiple data types at the same time. You can have integers right next to strings, floats next to, entire dictionaries, and they happily accept duplicates. They're initialized with the big brackets L equals 1.
And since everyone listening is probably familiar with indexing, we won't dwell on it. But we have to emphasize the primary rule. Access is always variable name index. And indexing always starts from 0. Always.
And why is that so crucial to repeat?
Because of that zero-based indexing, it immediately creates a pitfall later. When we need to iterate up to the list's total size, let's call it no1. The highest valid index is always going to be no1. We'll see this pop up again when we get to the loops for the burst and paradox.
Okay, so let's talk practical creation. When we build a non-empty list, say a list of scores, the elements must be separated by commas. That comma is the key delimiter. It's what tells Python that each item is a distinct individual element. It is absolutely critical. If you skip the commas, Python will either throw an error, or even worse, it might assume you have one giant string or a tuple, and that completely corrupts your data structure. The comma just ensures that when you run len, you get the exact discrete count you were expecting.
All right, moving beyond the structure, let's get into the essential actions. Adding and removing elements. When we add data, we use the AUDIOBOOK keyword.
Yep. Append is your simple utility for just adding a single value to the end of the list. But you have to remember the key rule from all the source material that append takes only one argument. If you try to pass it 2 scores without wrapping them somehow, Python just throws a tantrum.
And that brings us right to what you could call the nested list challenge, which in my experience is kind of the first big conceptual hurdle to really understanding matrices. So if I need to add multiple scores, but I want them to be treated as a single thing, like a row in a matrix, I have to encapsulate them. I have to append a list to a list.
Exactly right. So you'd execute something like lappend 98, 78, 46. And now your outer list has an element that is itself another list, which immediately means you need layered indexing.
Right, which means to get an element inside that inner list, you need 2 sets of brackets. It reflects the zero-based indexing of both the outer element's position and the inner element's position. So if that inner list is at index 1 of the main list, and I want the score 78, I'm looking at L11.
And that layered indexing is the absolute prerequisite for understanding any multidimensional data structure. If you're struggling with that second bracket, you're going to struggle with matrix algebra. Now, what about the reverse? Removing elements, using .remove.
Okay, so the remove keyword is used to eliminate a specified value from the list. Not, and this is important, not necessarily a specified index.
Correct. And here's where it gets complicated. It shares that single argument rule with append. But, more significantly, if the value you specify exists more than once, remove only eliminates the first occurrence it finds.
Wait, really? So if I have a list with duplicated data like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I call remove 3, the list becomes 1, 2, 3, 5. I have to manually call remove a second time to clear the other 3.
That's right. It forces you to write extra logic if you need to, globally remove duplicates, which really just highlights the complication of working with dynamic data that isn't unique. And like you said earlier, you can't just pass multiple values to remove unless that whole collection you want to remove exists as a single sublist element inside the main list. It's very, very strict about its arguments.
Let's transition now. We're moving from the static rules of lists to the dynamic logic of foundational programming patterns, starting with our first one, summing elements. This is where we hit that infamous, really complex line of code that handles converting multiple user inputs all at once.
Yes, the input conversion pipeline. You need to know the structure by heart. But let's talk about how it works functionally, not just reciting the syntax .list.
BAP and input enter numbers .split. Okay, so we read these functions from the inside out. starting with input. That just captures the user's raw input as one single long string.
Then you've got the essential string function split. It takes that raw string and just breaks it apart into individual string elements. Usually it separates them based on spaces. So the input 10, 20, 30 becomes 3 separate strings, 10, 20, and 30.
Okay, and next comes the map function. This is the conversion engine, right?
Yeah, you can think of it as the parallel processing step. Map just efficiently applies the int function to every single element that was output by split. It's all happening on the fly, transforming all those strings into integers. And finally, the outer list function wraps all those ready-to-use integer values into a perfectly formatted, iterable Python list. It's a hugely efficient shortcut.
So once we have that list of integers, the summation logic is pure, repeatable pattern. We initialize a tracking variable, let's call it total sum, and we just set it to 0.
And we use a classic for I in range to iterate. But hold on, here's a crucial insight. This elevates it beyond just textbook summation. Why do we teach this manual accumulation? Why not just use Python's built-in sum function?
That's a good point. It's because real-world programming often needs us to apply conditional logic inside that loop.
Yeah.
Right? We might need to only sum the positive numbers, or maybe only the numbers divisible by 3. The manual structure, total sum plus lie, lets us insert an if statement for that kind of filtering. The simple sum function doesn't really allow for that.
Exactly. The pattern isn't just about adding, it's about iterating and tracking. It allows for all sorts of sophisticated filtering or transformations during that accumulation process.
Now, a really critical debugging insight that trips up even experienced coders: scope and indentation. If that final print total sum statement creeps back inside the for loop, you're suddenly printing, what, n partial sums? A total mess.
You have to make sure that print, total sum, is at a lower indentation level than the loop. That guarantees the program finishes all nondular additions before it outputs the final complete result. Master the tracking pattern, and you master the scoping rules.
Okay, so if summation is about accumulating data, the next key pattern is about how we find specific data points within that structure, which leads us to our second pattern, the birthday paradox simulation. This is all about searching and tracking, but with randomized data.
This scenario is simulation, yeah. We're generating nondular random birthdays out of 365 days and then trying to figure out if any two of them match. The required setup starts with importing the necessary module, import random.
And we generate the dates inside a loop, right? We populate a dates list by repeatedly calling random.randint1 365. We have to remember that both the 1 and the 365 are inclusive in that range. That's critical for an accurate simulation.
Once those random dates are generated, the strategic key, the most important part for efficient duplicate detection, is sorting. You just use the built-in dates.sort.
Why is that such a strategic move? I mean, we could spend time writing nested loops to compare every date against every other date, but that would be incredibly slow for large groups.
Precisely. If you have a group of size nullars comparing every item against every other item, you're looking at roughly null squared comparisons. But if you sort it first, detection becomes trivial. You only need to check adjacent elements. If datc equals datc plus 1, you found a match. Simple as that.
The detection loop itself needs some careful handling of the indices to avoid errors, though. We use a while island, one loop, that -1, which we flagged earlier. It's crucial. It stops the loop before the last index, so we don't try to compare the final element against a non-existent I plus 1.
And inside that loop, the tracking mechanism is essential. We use a flag variable, we initialize it, maybe flag 0. The whole purpose of the flag is just to simplify the conclusion at the end.
So if that match condition, if it datc plus 1 is met, we immediately just set the flag to 1, flag 1.
And the beauty of the flag is how cleanly it separates the detection logic from the result logic. Instead of trying to put complex else statements inside your iteration loop, you just check the flag outside the loop. If flag is still 0 after the loop finishes, you know for a fact no repetition was found. It's clean, it's modular. It's a textbook example of using a Boolean tracker.
That sets us up perfectly for our final section, which covers 2 more foundational patterns: the naive search and the essential logic of a basic sort.
The naive search is really the programming baseline. It's the simplest way you can find a specific number in a list without relying on Python's, extremely fast built-in optimized searches. It's necessary knowledge.
The structure for it often involves a bigger wrapper loop that lets the user search again and again until they signal they want to exit. The source material usually standardizes this exit condition as a while n-1 loop, where the user just inputs myGuess1 to terminate.
And the searching logic itself is just straightforward iteration, a simple For I in range, len loop that checks if line equals n. But here's the efficiency trade-off and why this pattern is so critical to learn. Once the value is found, you absolutely must use the break keyword immediately.
Ah, the moment of pure efficiency heaven. I think every programmer remembers the first time they debugged a search loop and realized they wasted like 20 seconds checking a million entries after finding the target at index 10.
Exactly. Using break is just fundamental programming hygiene. It immediately halts the execution of the loop it's inside. It prevents the program from wasting precious computation time checking the rest of the list. It's the simplest way to introduce optimization into a baseline search.
Okay, let's wrap up with the obvious sort. This illustrates the logic behind selection sort. We repeatedly find the minimum element in the remaining list, move it, and then repeat until the original list is empty.
This is a classic computationally heavy pattern, and it's deliberately designed to show you the work involved in sorting. You start by initializing an empty destination list, maybe call it shortle. The entire sorting process is then wrapped in a high-level while len zero loop.
That while condition is the heartbeat of the algorithm, isn't it? It guarantees the process continues until the source list, LA, is completely, totally depleted.
Yep. And inside that loop, we run an inner for loop. Its only job is to scan the current state of L, compare every element, and find the absolute minimum value remaining in the list for that one cycle.
Once that minimum element is identified, two critical things have to happen in sequence. First, it gets appended to our destination list, shortle.
And second, it must be immediately removed from the sorts list, L, using L remove minimum. If you forget that removal step, you end up just finding and appending the same minimum value over and over again, and your while loop never terminates. It's an infinite loop.
Right. And that is the pattern. It's acknowledged in our sources that this method is computationally inefficient. Yeah. It might take over 80 steps just to sort a small list of 7 elements, but that inefficiency serves a purpose. It acts as the foundational template for understanding why better algorithms like merge sort or quick sort are so necessary for professional development. It gives you crucial context on time complexity.
So if we synthesize this entire deep dive into your final revision notes, your formula sheet, we've covered the essential list structure rules, the flexibility in type and duplication, and we covered 5 core programming patterns you just have to know. The input conversion pipeline, the tracking summation logic, the randomized data tracking strategy using sorting, the basic search efficiency you get with the break keyword, and that selection sort pattern that relies on the while len zero loop coupled with the remove function.
That is your comprehensive formula sheet. And the beauty is that once you understand this base logic, this pattern flow, you can easily vary it. You could reverse the logic, sort by maximum instead of minimum. Or you could swap out the naive search for a faster built-in function like the in operator. But the fundamental logic, the architecture you build around the list, that remains the key. Master the pattern, not just the specific keywords.
And here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. This deep understanding of list indexing, particularly layered indexing for nested structures, it is not the end of the line. It is the absolute prerequisite for the next level of computational complexity. We're talking matrices, matrix operations, and cross products. That's where the real computational challenges begin. Get these patterns right, and you are ready for that next phase of advanced data handling.
Food for thought. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you next time.